So, good evening. Welcome all the speakers. This evening seminar on the financial condition in this COVID-19 pandemic period. Please start it. Now, Smita, you will continue.
Okay. Hello.
Smita Shurukar, hello.
Yeah. Okay. Good evening,
Okay.
all of you. Welcome. I welcome all our honorable speakers, guests, and all the members of AIWC all over India. All India Women Conference
Special acknowledgement.
is one of the oldest organization established in 1927, and AIWC Calcutta branch is one of the branch also established in 1927. We actually we work on different projects nationally and internationally under the guidance of our head office, New Delhi. But our basic objective are upliftment of underprivileged persons on their health, on education and skill development for the development of the women folk mainly and children. So during this pandemic COVID-19, AIWC members were trying to enrich themselves and enrich themselves the knowledge and or social activities by organizing webinars in our head office, our zone, and also the branches of all over India. So today we are also inviting our honorable, knowledgeable speakers on the subject to talk about on the subject. And now I request Mrs. Rinku Ghosh, our moderator, to proceed for the session. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me here to conduct this session at a very crucial moment of a nation's history. And let me introduce you to the panelists first. Okay, so we have with us
What happened?
We can't hear you. You muted yourself.
You're on mute, ma'am.
No, you're still on mute.
Is it okay now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have with us first up is Rohit Jalan. He is director of Link Pen and Plastics. He will be giving us the industry perspective of the economy and how we can make it back the recovery curve and what will be our place in the world. So we also have two academics with us. There's Barnali Bhandari. She's a senior fellow at National Council of Applied Economic Research, New Delhi. And she has a background in international economics and macroeconomics. And she specifically focuses on the impact of globalization on development. Then we have Dr. Sanjukta Das. She's Associate Fellow also of NCAER Delhi. And she has done some seminal work on microcredit and direct cash benefit transfers. And finally, we have fashion designer Paromita Banerjee. And why we have her here is as a representative of a sector which is considered worst hit, and that is the fashion industry, which along with travel, tourism, and media industry have been impacted very badly. So she comes from the worst affected sector, and she will talk about survival strategies and riding this tough out. Well, then let's go. I would like to begin with Rohit. Rohit, you know, Jawaharlal Nehru once said that unless there's a crisis, we don't think out of the box. It forces us to think. So we have very gloomy headlines around us. The GDP plunging, massive joblessness, reverse migration, farmers not quite making the recovery path despite all the relief packages and stimulus that is being given. The Manrega has also reached its saturation capacity when it comes to providing jobs to migrant laborers. So these are a lot of low points. Our global ratings are down, and no projection holds. Because the situation is fluidic, we are a risk-averse country. So amid all this doom and gloom, where do you see India's larger macroeconomy headed? And what are the corrections we need to make along the way to ride this trough out? The government has given a lot of stimulus packages, but they are all credit-based. Is there an alternative suggestion, an alternative roadmap, or something you feel policymakers need to look at, rather than just forwarding credit-based stimulus packages and increasing cash flow? Rohit.
Hi, thank you for giving me an opportunity to be here today, and thank you for the introduction, Rinku, and thank you, everyone. I'd like to welcome, all the participants also. So yes, we are in the same, difficult situation. These days, I think people see it, once in a, I mean, not everyone even see it once in a lifetime, but we have been in this century or decade, and we have experienced this, observed this, and this is definitely, not anyone was, looking at. So, personally, and also from our, industry, point of view, we feel that this is, of course, temporary, right? But of course, it's going to affect the economy, actually the global, economy for quite some time until, the vaccination is out. And during this process, during this journey, it's not going to be an easy journey for any one of us. Of course, except, the people who are in the essential industries. So, as you rightly said, there has been a decline in, GDP. I think there was over a 40% contraction in GDP already in Q4 of FY20, and unemployment, has risen almost to 26%. This was in April, and there were literally 140 million Indians who were left jobless. So going forward, I feel that Indian economy and global economy from next year, it's going to improvise, but during this duration, quite a few things are going to be affected. And so during this time, all organizations, all startups, everyone, they need to basically think out of the box, look at, differentiated strategies, how you can differentiate yourself. We have seen many organizations have even tried to adapt. So we've seen that in last few months, a lot of hyper local trade model has evolved, e-commerce has evolved, technology has evolved, and the only way to survive during this pandemic is going to think ways of how you can survive and sustain.
How have you sustained? How has your company done pre-COVID and post-COVID? What is the recovery like?
So
illustrate with your example what measures you have taken to ride the tough out and make a long-term projection, because this is going to last a good 2 to 3 years.
Yes, well, it is expected to last for a couple of years, as it's heard. So what we have been doing is we have adapted to new technological ways of how we can survive and sustain during this time. So our industry is so we call ourselves as more like a sales and marketing company rather than writing instrument manufacturer. So our role is pure sales and marketing. And for us, we've got about 300 plus sales team if you look at across India. And the typical way of selling was these salespeople, they used to visit shop to shop, cover 25-30 shops every day, collect orders, and that's so now we have actually we've done some technological advancement. At the same time, we've helped some people to also so unlike many organizations which have actually laid off people, we've also hired fresh newer people during this time. And the only way we feel we can survive is by increasing our network coverage. So a couple of ways how we have tried to increase our network coverage is, firstly, we've started an online, or rather an app-based order taking system. So instead of writing, manually, we've started taking orders on an app-based platform. At the same time, we've hired, several call centers in different parts of the country who are assisting our sales team on the street to take orders through telephone. So we're trying to get into a no touch or a non-contact based order taking system. So this has definitely given us a good direction. I think it is a one of a kind move that we have taken, and we hope that this is going to give us the desired results. As a result, in last couple of months, we have been able to increase our network coverage almost by 25 to 30%. So we now roughly reach out to almost 100,000 retail outlets across the country.
Okay. Okay. So I will now just go to Dr. Bhandari. Can you hear me, Dr. Bhandari?
Yes, I can hear you now. Rinku, before I start, can I share my screen to show up a small PPT?
You want to share a screen? Have something,
Yes.
some presentation to show us?
Yes, a very small presentation. Yeah.
Please share your screen.
Firstly, thank you for inviting me to this very august, clearly historical organization. It's my first time here. Thank you so much. I'm really honored. And on a funny, not a funny note, but on a side note, as a macroeconomist, I typically get invited to male-dominated panels. I'm the only female, and I'm always wondering whether I'm there because I'm a macroeconomist or the female representative. So I'm deeply honored that I'm in a female-dominated panel here. Thank you. So without further ado, I just want to start is that, I mean, this is a very brief outline of what I'm going to present.
Yes,
I think
so
all
that
of-
everybody, and this is just goes out to the audience. Dr. Bhandari is giving us an overview of what the economy looks like now. And then she will probably give some suggestions as to the way we can go forward.
Thank you. We'll do this, we'll split up in parts. I'll just give you a broad overview of the macroeconomy. And then we'll talk about, we'll talk about the policy suggestions as and when the question answer session as they come. So one of the first things is that just to sort of show you what has happened to COVID, we instead of tracking infections, because as you know, number of infections depends on number of tests, and we were really slow in the beginning about ramping up our testing capacity. We don't. So what we see here instead, what we track is the number of deaths, COVID-19 related official deaths, and it's hard to distinguish that. So when you look at this, is just the all India picture, and as you can see, the number of daily deaths has gone up. Although the number of daily growth rate has come flattened, but the number of daily deaths has gone up, and even in the last 3 days, we have seen 1,000 deaths per day. So if you think that COVID-19 is slowing, no, not as per the latest numbers. There are some numbers when you recompile these numbers and they come to very huge numbers, like on 17 June, we had 2003 deaths. But overall, what we find is that the number of deaths has actually been going up, and we have now almost having continuous days of back-to-back days of 1,000 deaths. So that's the scenario. Obviously, there are other factors which are showing the large factor has come down in some states. There's some slowing down, even in West Bengal and Assam. But in the southern states, it's increasing. And Delhi, by the way, if you go see the Delhi trends, that has actually, after going down significantly, it has now gone back again. So there are all
Up, yes, it's up
regional
3,000
variations.
again, 3,000 cases a day.
Sorry?
Yeah, Delhi is now 3,000 a day, so it's swung back.
No, it's not 3,000 a day. No. I'm just saying is the trend of number of daily deaths have, after going down, has gone up. It's not 3,000 a day, it's about 20 a day.
So 3,000 positive cases a day, not deaths. I'm not talking about deaths.
No. So here I'm tracking deaths because the number of infections depends on number of infections depends on testing, and initially we were very slow on testing. The conditions, the rules for testing kept on changing. So one thing we were sure about the deaths, at least the recorded deaths, even that could be an undercount. But to be scientifically right, many people are tracking deaths to be sure that the cases have gone up. So that's, I'm giving my interpretation based on number of daily deaths. Before we go on to the lead talk about the macroeconomy, here is just something NCR does as a regular basis. The red lines show you what we call the business confidence index and the political confidence index. Very briefly, the business confidence index is based on survey of business sentiments of firms across 6 cities. So around, we cover 500 to 600 firms across 6 cities in India, the main ones including Kolkata. And what we find is that, as you can very well see with this number, with this number, that the business confidence index has actually plunged. Now, the repeated point that I want to make to you is that COVID-19, yes, it is a final sort of knell to us, but the economy had been slowing down even before that. So what you find is, if you look at this business confidence index, is a very nice, very clear, this red line is a very downward trend. And by Q4 and then Q1, it just plunges deeply. Similarly, political confidence index, which actually asks firms about how they feel about the central government managing on certain indices. The blue columns here are in what we economists use called the index of industrial production, IIP. And you have IIP General and IIP Manufacturing. The sky blue line is IIP General Manufacturing, and the dark blue is IIP General. What we find here again is that when you look at these IIP numbers, again, these are the growth rates, sorry, the indices, and again, the IIP has plunged again in Q1. So both business sentiments, which is done by NCR, and IIP is collected by the Indian National Statistical Agencies, they both show that in Q1, there's a plunge. Before in May and June, as NCR also takes up macro reviewing and forecasting on a quarterly basis. And I don't want to get into details here, but just want to show you here that in June, when we were making the prediction for how the first quarter is going to look like, we had said that we had made these assumptions and said that gross value added, which is a measure of income in the economy, production and income in the economy, it actually showed, we actually predicted that the income is going to, estimated that GVA is going to fall by 26% in the first quarter. And the number that I want you to take away from here is that we expected, or we forecasted that at that point of time in June, given the information we had, which we had very little, it showed, we said that in 2021, that is this current fiscal year, we would expect GDP to fall by 12.4%. So what we expect that for this year is going to fall by 12.4%. So this is a very deep fall, unprecedented in Indian economic history. This slide, I just want to show to you what we did is, we sort of simulated what if a lot of us, as Rinku said out in the beginning, that, we faced reverse migration issues. We faced challenges to supply of raw materials. So what economists we call that is an aggregate supply shock. And also we faced our aggregate demand shock, that is, consumers just not buying things. So we sort of modeled, what if you have different types of supply and demand shocks, and therefore, what are the impact on the rest of the macro parameters. I just want to point out to you here is that there's this scenario. If your supply shocks like reverse migration, MSME is not opening, you don't get your supply materials, you are not able to transport your goods on time, all that happens, suppose your growth rate is actually negative 10%, you would actually expect the inflation to go up. And the term that we use for that is called stagflation. That is both output falling down and your inflation going up. So, and that means automatically means employment would go up. So the scenario is not good. So what we find what do the actual numbers tell us? And the actual numbers tell us is that as these are quarterly growth rates, again of GDP, gross domestic product, which measures very loosely and casually, it measures the income or production of all goods and services produced in the country. As you can see here, GDP fell down from 8.7% in Q3 of 2017-18 to 4.1% in Q3 of 2019-20. So I made the point that GDP was already falling steeply over the last couple of years, 2 years, and then comes COVID. And what we find is GDP actually fell by 23.9%. I mean, that's a very steep fall. We were very close, so we're happy about that, but we're not very happy that the fact that, like the GDP falling by 24%. So yes, the climb back is going to be that much more challenging. And very briefly, we talked about the macro scenario is this GDP. I can go deeper if if you have more questions. The one part that one stakeholder that we want to look at is firms. And firms, essentially, as I said, NCR does a quarterly business expectation survey of firms across 6 cities. And here we actually asked firms, and I'm only reporting numbers for April, May, June. We asked firms, were you operational across region-wise, industry sector-wise, and firm size-wise? And what you find is, again, it is a smaller firms less than 100 crore. That is, they are the ones who bore the burden of this thing. So overall, we find that, okay, only 40% were operational in April, 58% in May, and 89.1% in June. So obviously, as it went up, as the economy opened, more and more firms were operational. But there are differences across large and small firms. There are differences across manufacturing and service sector firms. Very interestingly, more of the service sector firms are open. 60% of the service sector firms are open in April, 66% in May, as opposed to all the manufacturing sectors, consumer durable goods, capital goods, and all that stuff. But what we find in that when it comes to June, only 83% of the service sector firms are open, and rest of the firms are still, whereas 90% of the manufacturing sector firms were open. When you look at region-wise, east, west, north, and south, again we find that the west was the one which was most affected, and this is not surprising considering that Bombay and Pune were covered and the worst affected cities. Whereas by the time it rolls down to June, we find that it's the south which has the least number of firms open. Again, we know this because Chennai is one of the cities that recovered, and Chennai was under lockdown from almost the last week of June. So there are very much differences. And then I just quickly run through the graphs here. So here I'm just pointing out to you the major stories. So these numbers show you how the firms felt, what happened to the cost of raw materials, cost of electricity, and labor. So what this number is telling you, this number is telling you that 47.9 or 48% of firms perceived or responded that the cost of their raw materials actually went up over the last 3 months. Similarly, 49.2% of the firms in our sample represent that electricity cost went up, and 51% of the firms said that labor cost went up between April to June. Most of the firms, as you can see, they actually incurred additional costs of sanitizing office premises. Obviously, as the numbers over April to June, the numbers went up because as more and more firms are operational, they needed sanitizing. Similarly, about providing food and residential services to workers, and similarly about providing transport to workers between home and workplace. Again, I want to, this thing is that majority of the firms were actually making payments on all kinds of, whether making interest on loans, goods and services taxes, dues to suppliers, and firms face logistic issues. But the interesting thing is, although firms face logistic issues, they were actually able to meet, some of them were actually able to meet your pending sales order, at least in June. So the question is, what happened in June that they were able to meet the pending sales order? And I think you have already got a hint of the story from Mr. Jalan, who says that he has moved to e-commerce platforms. And this is exactly what we discovered, that majority of the firms, that quite a few of the firms had actually moved to e-commerce platforms in April, May, June, or they were actually selling a different good or services compared to March 2020. So these are all just percentage of firms. Look at the variations here. What we find here is that actually when you look at the e-commerce platforms, it's mostly the large firms which are switching to e-commerce platforms, not the smaller firms so much, except the East. If you look at regionally, we find that regionally East seems to be adapting e-commerce platforms really well. When we look at another coping strategy was whether they were selling a goods and services, different goods and services compared to what they were selling in March 20. Again, here we find that it's smaller firms who are actually switching more than the larger firms. Again, if you take 100 crore as a sort of a line, any firm less than smaller than 100 crore were actually switching, whereas firms greater than 100 crore did not. So what we find are very variations across size, regions, and type of good that you're producing. And last but not least, and here is a point where again, Madam Rinku said in the beginning about taking credit. What we find is that most of the firms actually did not want to take credit over the next 6 months. They did not plan to take credit. Only 7.2% said they did not plan to take credit, and about 8.4% said they needed to take credit for new investment, and 23.2% said they needed for working capital. So firms were there are significant variations of firms. Costs have remained elevated, and future sentiments, what we find, are actually relatively muted. When we look at new orders, yes, they have gone up, but they have gone up, but it's still very slow. only only 16.2% firms are responding that in June that their new orders went up. Similarly, sorry, over the last 3 months. Similarly, only 15% of firms are saying that their sales went up over the last 3 months. Exports and output price. Future costs at the same time, if you see future costs, sentiments about future costs for the next 6 months about the same things, raw materials, electricity and labor, they have remained elevated. So I just want to stop here and just stop and make the main point that this is an historical situation that we are in. And what we find is that future sentiments about production, sales, net order are dampened, but our costs have remained elevated. We are adapting, but clearly not enough. On that note, we'll stop. And sorry for taking a longer time. Thank you.
No, that's fine, because it gives us a holistic find a way. Okay, so now I'll go to Paramita. You know, taking off from where Bornali's graphs have sort of given a whole picture of the economy.
Right.
She mentions two things, that adaptability to e-commerce has gone up, and it has particularly gone up in Eastern India.
Right.
You know, you're a fashion designer, nobody is buying fashion. So how have you adapted your business? You were telling me that your e-commerce business is up by about 40%, 40 to 45% compared to last year.
Yeah.
So how have you managed to adapt your business to the new normal?
Right. Well, thank you for having me here. Really, it's quite an enlightening panel. But and it's always nice to get an economics background and a reality check to the entire thing. But I think I'll come in as I think a businesswoman trying to really make ends meet right now in a COVID situation. But before I say that, I want to mention a couple of things. You know, I'm a fashion designer. Yes, I have a brand. Yes, but I think the industry in which I am, the fashion industry, so to say, is in a very ironical state right now, you know, because clothing is a necessity at the end of the day, but how much do you spend on your clothes is the catch, you know, whether you are going to spend the minimum amount just to survive or just to, wear and pass your day and all of that, or whether you're going to buy in designer price points. That's where we come in. But here again, I have to mention that brands like us are trying to, I think, connect the producers and the consumers by working with the handloom sector. You know, our brand primarily work, and there are a lot of brands like ours who are persistently, relentlessly working in the handloom sector, trying to connect the craftsmen, the artisans with the market in a contemporary aesthetics, etc., etc. And that has been majorly hit now, you know. Why? Because ours primarily is a very volatile industry. It's a very unorganized sector. You know, there aren't really rules. There aren't, the weavers hardly pay taxes because they're not part of a bigger policy. And that's where we come in, because we have our corporations, we have our organizations and companies. But the basic understanding that I have here is there needs to be a market. But right now there is no market for, fancy goods. If I consider, designer goods as fancier priced items, there is no market. And why? Because the psyche of the people, that's completely gone, you know. Either you're going to survive, let the year pass, let the pandemic disappear, which would take a couple of months. But it's just sort of, I think, sailing through would be the strategy for all kinds of businesses, be it a small scale, micro or macro, or like 100 crore. And I think the idea at the end of the day is just to sort of lie low and let this survive, which is why I think what we've done is we've adapted, you know, our entire, you know, my friends in the industry, businesses like ours, we've adapted by switching to e-commerce. We've had a 1-year-old e-commerce website, thankfully, which garnered a lot of orders because online was open. People were sitting at home and doing retail therapy for that matter. And I really find the product line in the handloom sector, in the handicraft, craftsman sector, that's phenomenally increased, you know, because the craftsmen have constantly adapted to newer products, which I think is a huge plus point because you're constantly getting the economy rolling in that way, rather than, you know, zilch for that matter. Yeah. So I think adapting has become primary for these last couple of months, is my understanding. Yes.
So at least your adaptation strategies have helped these weavers survive somehow.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Are you saying that?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. But the reality check, I mean, of course, is dismal. It depends from company to company, from brands to brands. But the reality check is there needs to be a market for the products, and market, I think, is connected to the psyche of the people, consumers like you and me. If the psyche does not improve, then I don't think there would be a market for fancy items. Really.
So are you considering branching out into a more affordable range, something that you didn't do before maybe, but now you would probably consider?
Not really, and I'll tell you why. Because each product in a designer segment, and why is a designer segment so expensive, is because every product is curated or brought to you in such a way that it passes through multiple hands. It might be uplifting older traditional, you know, weaves, older traditional heritage, which in itself is dying down, you know, so that comes at a price. Yeah, so we might be, but then primarily, I think that should not be the strategy for any kind of organization like ours, because you don't want to sell yourself cheap at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, you're also uplifting the karigari for that matter, you know, and karigari comes at a price. People need to understand it, really. Yeah.
I think people, but you know, right now it's not their priority. As
No,
you say, the
absolutely
psyche
not.
has to change.
No, absolutely not. The psyche has to change, and we need to give it time. So like I said, we just need to sail through and survive this period by sort of lying low and internalizing within the company as to what all you can make changes.
So I will now bring in Dr. Sanjukta. Dr. Sanjukta, are you there?
Yes, Ms. Ghosh. I'm sorry I'm not being able to turn on the camera because my internet connection is a little unstable.
That's okay. That's fine. We
Yes.
need to hear your mind.
Can you hear me?
Okay. So what I wanted to ask you was, you know, there's been a lot of stimulus packages and a lot of cash transfers to perk up the rural economy. But you know, going by the estimates that have come in, the promised amounts haven't quite been distributed, and the recipients and the beneficiaries do not have the cash in their hands as yet. So what about the direct? Do you think there is a bigger role for direct cash transfer benefits for a migrant laborers and for the entire unorganized sector, which has been really hit hard?
Yes. At NCAR, we have studied direct benefit transfers in various schemes, and what we have found in one of the main findings was that ICT infrastructure is a big challenge to the distribution of rations and cash transfers. This is what we have found. So based on that, the evidence regarding, there is not much evidence regarding how well a direct cash transfer, like say a universal basic income, would work in India. but there has been a lot of studies done on cash transfers, like conditional cash transfers, like transfer from the government to the beneficiaries based on some conditions, like putting children in school. So the evidence from the cash transfers indicate that they help in a lot of ways in consumption smoothing and lifting households out of poverty and basically empowerment of the poorer sections. So, but there is like currently there is not much evidence on a universal basic income. But at the same time, the current crisis has shown that there's a lot of exclusion happening from, like the government has promised free rations to the poorest households. But even now, due to Aadhaar related issues, the grains and the cash transfers may not be reaching the poor households. So,
Won't have a single, there is a proposal for a single ration card,
yes,
which
so there is proposal,
in all parts
exactly.
of the country, but that will still take some time to be implemented, to be
Exactly,
operationalized.
exactly.
And until it is
So looking,
operationalized,
yes,
I think disbursal will always be a problem.
yes. So portability is happening within a state to some extent, the data shows us, but interstate till now there is not any data on portability, though it was supposed to have come live by now. Given the challenges with Aadhaar-based issues of exclusion of beneficiaries and targeting issues that come up, I think uh, one of the things that that have come up is we can possibly universalize PBS in the short term, so that there is no exclusion of needy households. So the biggest problem with targeting is errors of exclusion. So with a universal transfer or PBS, everybody can access the grain, and so that could be a short-term solution. And at the same time, the government could evaluate how to improve DBT in PBS. In the longer term, a decision can be made regarding whether to switch back to DBT or follow a universal transfer.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sanjukta. So I will now, taking off on all this, I will now again go back to Rohit. Rohit, you there with us?
Yes.
Yeah, Rohit, there is a lot of talk about, how crisis generates opportunities. And there is talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat, how we should become a manufacturing hub, how we should become self-sufficient. There is the slogan vocal for local. And there is talk about also making for the world. So how realistic is vocal for local at this point of time, considering that we do have a lot of trade dependency when it comes to intermediary inputs in industrial production? I'm not talking about traditional sectors, but larger industrial production lines are dependent a lot on Chinese inputs, a lot on low-cost inputs. What should be the strategy in India to incentivize local manufacturing so that we can have 100% homegrown accessories?
So you're absolutely right. I would, just like to share, I read an article which said, industries like pharma, for example, they import 70% of, one of the
APIs, yes,
from China.
APIs are imported.
Correct. And even automobile sector, as a matter of fact, almost 25 to 30% of the raw materials come in from China. So similarly, there is chemicals and textiles, and a lot of industries are actually dependent on China. Not to mention renewable and solar panels. 80% almost comes from China.
LED batteries. LED comes entirely from
right.
Lithium batteries.
Correct. having said so, I think this is a very good opportunity. Of course, it's not going to be easy, and it's going to be, slightly time taking, but it is a very good opportunity when the government is, trying to promote Atmanirbhar Bharat, and, which is an extension or a repackaged version of, Make in India campaign, to promote local manufacturing, local industries, and to be play a major role in the global market. So definitely government has announced from time to time their support, but of course there is some vagueness still in terms of the kind of packages that they actually really want to offer to industries to promote export. Of course, it has been there in talks, right? So we feel, I think,
There is some talk about a graded incentivization, as in when it comes to raw materials. Suppose you're importing a raw material. So what the government is proposing, apparently, this is all in the policy paper stage, is that they incentivize local production of that raw material over a 5-year period, then a 10-year period. So you get an incentive, a bigger incentive for the shorter term.
right.
And once you get economies of scale, then they reduce that incentive over the 10-year term. So are you aware of something like this?
Yes. So, well, unfortunately or fortunately, my industry, we don't depend on, Chinese, raw materials as such. We mostly utilize all our raw materials, packing materials. Most of them, they are procured locally. Of course, our R&D is done, in Korea, and there are still, some kind of procurement, of course, that happens,
I
overseas.
think that is needed because technology transfer is needed.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we will not have global quality.
Correct. So to maintain and to grow or match as per global standards, we really need to take bold steps to make technological advancements, and we need to promote, smaller players to step into this, to invest money in R&D, which is, of utmost importance in these days and in, the coming times.
Okay. So are you availing of any benefits from the Atma Bharat Nirbhar scheme?
So actually, since we are already so I think it was more towards, shifting, organizations that are, importing or that are dependent, very highly on import of raw materials. I think it is going to be more advantageous for them rather than industries who are already, utilizing nation's resources.
Okay. So are you looking at diversifying your product portfolio during the pandemic? And 2, are you going to expand to newer markets, emerging markets in Africa, for example?
Right. So, as you know, our category is directly related to, education, right? So we feel, despite the industry, due to the digitization has, reduced the growth, I mean to say, is reduced. We still feel that there is a lot of potential because there are still a lot of economies which are really backward in terms of literacy. So even if we look at, India, there is, the rural market, which constitutes more than 65% of the country. Still there is a lot of scope of, enhancing literacy for the that part of the society. But looking at overseas, yes, I think there is a great opportunity. We of course don't intend to expand our portfolio at the moment because we are looking at a global market share rather than just an Indian market share. So there has been a lot of inquiries in last couple of months, as per some of the data shared by Dr. Bonali. There have been inquiries and about from various parts of the world actually, who are probably trying to shift their sourcing, from China to alternate regions, who have the ability, to provide the resources or supplies. So yes, we are looking at expanding. We export to almost about 45 to 50 countries apart from India, and we are expecting the export division to grow phenomenally, especially in FY 21-22. This year, of course, is going to stay affected. It will take time for the buyer and the seller to get to know each other and adapt, and it's going to remain like this for some time. But I think next year should be like quite a positive year.
Dr. Barnali, can you come in, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm right here.
Yeah. So when we are talking, can India be a manufacturing hub? We haven't done it all these years since independence. It's going to take time. But what are our realistic chances?
So here I become an economist and I say I on one hand, and on the other hand, I use both my hands. That's a tough one. That's really a tough one because manufacturing has never been our strong suit. I think except in ancient India, maybe sometime. Even then we were better off as traders. Actually, I was working on skilling for the last couple of years also. And therefore, I'm trying to understand. And from that, the historical shows that we've been better off as a trading community right from the beginning. And even in the modern economy, we see that services has been the more dynamic sector in the Indian economy. So yeah, the shift to manufacturing is tough. Become a manufacturing hub. You really need to think about, what made China, I think in very simple questions, forget about China. Why is production moving out of China and moving into Bangladesh and Vietnam? What is it that Bangladesh and Vietnam offer that India is not offering? I think you have to just think in those terms. So, I mean, if you stop and think,
Dr. Bhandari, can I come in there?
Sure.
A little bit. Yes. Just to explain why it is going to Bangladesh and Nepal. You see, they are swamped by something called economic imperialism of China. They are part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which we are not a signatory to and which we will not accept. So there's a nationalism issue which is stalling that kind of an economic interaction. We do have Chinese investment, but we do not agree to Chinese imperialist terms. So that is why the investment is going to go very strongly to our neighbors, but not to us.
I kind of agree with you, because I don't think so it's just the Old Belt Initiative or just Chinese imperialism, because investment, I'm not talking about Nepal at all, actually. I'm talking about Bangladesh and Vietnam.
China has a very strong, they've taken over their economy.
But the reason why you see Bangladesh, but what about Bangladesh, right? Why is it manufacturing moving to Bangladesh? It is moving to Bangladesh and Vietnam because you're offering, I'm not saying that it's a model that we need to copy, but I'm just saying is what are the factors which enable it to be a manufacturing hub?
Yeah.
There are reasons, there are labor issues, factors of production issues, which are labor issues. We have labor laws, there has been research being done on it, which show that labor laws are not working in favor of us. We have stringent labor laws, which we are not able to reform. Again, I'm not saying that you should make firing a flexible thing. If you want to have flexible hiring and flexible firing policies at all, you need, along that with, you need is proper, very strong social security systems, where that means is the trinity, the health, pension, and unemployment benefits. These three have to go together. So I'm not at all saying that, but if you just think from a manufacturing thing, you need reliable for manufacturing electronics, which is where we want to be. We need a regular supply of electricity. We need regular supply of water. We need labor issues. We need land issues, which we are not able to resolve. We actually swung from one pendulum to the other. We had an 1886, 1800s British colonial law, which we reformed, we went to the other side. which makes acquiring land terribly expensive. We are trying environmental clearances took the longest amount of time, but now it comes so easy that we are harming our own environment. So there are trade-offs that we are not pricing in, or we're not even bothering to price in. We are just swinging from one ideology to other. I think which is a bigger challenge. We are not. So I think the challenge here is to price in your trade-offs. There's nothing doesn't come without a trade-off. So I think your factor of market issues, labor, land reforms are absolutely critical. I think from that perspective, what the government has done is quite interesting. Is the government has actually developed a land bank. So, it is in the process of identifying land banks. So,
Yes.
Basically the idea is the government has already acquired them or is done the thing, and
It's under process. They have started identifying them.
Yeah, so I think that's a very important thing. For labor, they're trying on the textiles market. They have this flexible labor market policies. I'm not sure whether Parliament has heard about them. But so that's again there were again trade-offs. But it seems they have a trying on policies. They are bringing in social security. They're seriously thinking about bringing in social security, about unemployment benefits, health, and pension. If you think about your Atal Pension Yojana, it is exactly this kind of thing. If you think about the health insurance schemes, the Ayushman Bharat, again, it's a health insurance scheme to the worker. So irrespective of where you're working, these schemes are being offered. I'm not saying they're perfect. Don't even think they're the best for the Indian economy or Indian structure or current rate of the fact that we are a low per capita income in the country. But even then, there's these policies are being thought of and are being introduced, and I think you have to take them in a positive manner, and hopefully we'll reform to become a larger state.
At least there's a start. But Dr.
Just
Bornali, at least there's a start.
It's a start. So from that angle, and then of course, you need supply, electricity, water, logistics. Recently, my colleague actually did some work on logistics issues. He actually surveyed surveyed roads across major highways, and they find that the Guwahati-Delhi National Highway is one of the worst. So, despite having GST, despite having e-way bills, we find that logistics issues continue to plague India. And of course, the COVID has only intensified those issues because of additional barriers to movement. So we haven't bothered to solve, not bothered. We have not been able to solve over these, I almost say, political economy and economic issues to become a manufacturing hub. Even if one of the significant problems in India is global. We are part of a global value chain. Unless until you improve your quality, you're not going to be a part of a global value chain, because everything a manufacturer demands is zero defect policy. That means
Yes.
you have to produce a policy of a certain quality. And at the end of the day, I mean, I can say this even without going with any evidence or empirical evidence, that you need quality. You have to think, if you want to compete at the global level. I mean, at the end of the day, if I'm a foreign investor, why should I put my money in India and suffer all the thing, suffer all the challenges? Unless until, why don't I just go to a country which offers me a red carpet? As another problem is the ease of doing business. We were all carried away with the ease of doing business, that we were doing well on the rankings. But the fact is, many business people have told us that they are not doing well. On ground, it hasn't played out.
The issue is the infrastructure issue. We need an infrastructure framework where all the pillars are at the same height.
Actually, we did.
You cannot have a patchy development in some zones, and
Yeah. So Rinku, what we did is we actually carried out a survey. Yeah, we carried out a survey of firms in December. In the BA survey, we actually keep on asking different sets of questions. We actually asked firms about their infrastructure needs. They actually did not complain so much about electricity and roads and power. What they were complaining about, and actually that was what we were coming to. They were actually complaining about health, and they were complaining about education and skills. I think the point that Rohit was mentioning, that a lot of people are unskilled. So skilling is a major challenge in India, and appropriate skilling. So again, we talked about it's not just about getting a degree. It's about making yourself employable. You have the right appropriate skills which the firms want to hire. And this is based on my research, and I was personally doing it, so I can say this with confidence. I was talking to Mr. Bhargava, the chairman of Maruti, And you know what he said? He said, I don't care, just give me class 10 pass, rest I will do. But give me good quality class 10 pass, people who have passed out class 10. Then I went to,
Basically, you are saying we need industry ready students, you know,
at
industry
least,
ready
the
candidates, graduates.
basic foundational skills need to be ready, which means, you know, reading, writing, learning, active listening, discipline, listening. So these are the foundational qualities. Industry ready, industry can do themselves. I cannot tell Mr. Jalan or Ms. Banerjee, you know, what the people they should hire, what skills they have. I can't, but I can give them people with basic good quality whom they can train. They may, I mean, there's some, so we ask firms, what do you want? Obviously, there's a difference between large and small firms. Large firms will say, you know, I can train. You don't need to bother. Just give me somebody who knows their educational quality is very good. If you look at this ASA type of reports, it shows that rural learning outcomes are very poor in India.
Yes, yes, yes.
So
If I
similarly, you
could
know,
just add in here, if I could
small-
just add in one small sentence here, I think what we are really trying to talk about is we need educated people and not just literate. You know, not
Yes.
just understanding your ABCs,
Yeah,
but
that
if you're educated, you can actually get all the aspects together and adapt to whichever environment, whichever
Exactly.
company you're working with. You know, I think
Yeah,
that's the
Exactly.
problem we've always had, I guess.
Adaptability, flexibility, even the point that, you know, that all of us are moving to e-commerce platforms in the firms. Well, even if you think about a Uber and Ola, right? All you need digital skills, but who's providing you that? Okay, fine. The upper middle class, urban upper middle class may have access to it, but what about the rest of the country? And now people are desperate to buy a smartphone, doing, you know, a lot of stories that you hear about buying a smartphone. But anyway, I'm not getting into that. So, you know, labor laws, labor quality, labor education, land laws, ease of doing business, so with the government needs to solve. Yes, infrastructure, a host of issues. If you want to be a manufacturing hub, I mean, I mean, I actually had gone to Tripura, and Tripura, the person told me actually is, again, the same thing. Madam, I just want a secretary who has the ability to write a good letter. So writing a letter, and you know, we are all been through those class 10 and 12 exams where we used to write letters, but apparently those letters don't help. Or, you know, I did border trade issues around Bangladesh, West Bengal and Nepal, Bangladesh. They're again the same things. You know, we are not, you know, what's trading us? What's stopping us from allowing the Nepalese traders to come in Siliguri and trade? You know, Siliguri is one of the hubs where where tea is traded, but we don't want to. We don't. People come to Siliguri from Nepal for shopping. People come to Siliguri for using airports. People come to Siliguri for you know, variety of things. Why not make it an international hub? So we have to think outside the box. Ultimately, it's the border regions are the worst. So I'm sorry for giving a long lecture, but
that's okay, because these are ideas. A lot of us can imbibe lessons from here and implement them in real life. So quickly to both Paramita, Rohit, you know, what are you doing to upskill your quality, or how much are you investing in R&D? Rohit first.
Yes. So I think.
Can I ask a quick question to Rohit also along with this?
Yeah, please add it.
Sorry, I was just very interested when you said that you had your R&D in Korea. So like, I just want to add on to Rinku's question, you know, about R&D, is upskilling your labor for R&D. What about, you know, why not R&D in India? You know, why are you not thinking about that also? So
so that's what I was talking to Rohit earlier also about technology transfer. It is probably, you know, get them to come here, set up shop, transfer the technology and skill our labor. That is what Make in India is actually all about, and some car companies are actually doing. So Rohit, you don't have plans of forming a technology cooperation pact as such?
So frankly speaking, so this is an extension, or I would say my answer would be an extension to you know, the point we were just discussing, because you know, R&D, it requires, you know, a lot of learning, lot of knowledge, lot of investment, and it is readily available as such in India, and that is why you know, we have to depend on certain things depend on certain things for, to countries like, Korea or even Japan, as a matter of fact, that are,
No, but you can get a tech transfer done, right? You
So
can bring in their
transfer-
experts one time, set up a small unit, and train your people, and then the thing can continue here, right?
yeah, it is possible, but the thing is, our industry per se, there is not much of a technological advancement that you can do. It's not like, an electronic or kind of an industry. It's, a simple writing instrument. So of course there are limitations, and then of course what matters is, the cost benefit analysis. How much does it really make
Yes,
sense?
exactly.
What is the kind of ROI? What is the kind of tenure you're looking at, for the returns? So these are factors that really have to be taken into consideration, when we
At the end of the day, it will be low cost. Even if
absolutely,
you will not use an Indian ingredient if it is high cost. That
absolutely.
is the dilemma which we have to solve.
You can imagine, for just simple pens, even 50 years ago or 25 years ago, they were still sold for 5 rupees, and today they are still sold for 5 rupees. So
Yes.
frankly speaking, you can imagine the kind of inflation and costs that have risen and gone up, over a period of years. But it's not
Yeah.
easy to go or upgrade customers from say, well, 10 rupees is a decent or a
Yeah.
quantifiable price segment, but looking at 20-30 rupees, which actually does not make any difference to a consumer in today's time, whether they are buying a 10 rupee or a 20 rupee product, it does not make much of a difference. So yeah.
Okay, Paramita, there's a lot of talk about vocal for local,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But how much are we buying local? Of course, you are in a sector where this is possible, where we
Absolutely.
can feel a little guilt-free, where we
Absolutely.
can feel, okay, we are buying desi fabric, we are supporting the local craftsmen,
Right.
we are supporting an organic process,
Right.
we are probably respecting the environment,
Right.
and we are, localizing the cycle, so
Right.
lesser of carbon footprints.
Right. Yeah.
So are you going to consciously pitch this in the domestic and the international market? Because abroad, they have all these tags on their products, ethically produced, organic, no blood diamond.
Right.
So do you see a possibility opening up for you in the larger international market where you can, leverage handmade as an asset, and where you can leverage local resources as an asset, as a sales pitch?
Well, Ms. Ghosh, you've really summed it up, So at this point of time, I really have to say that I'm privileged that I'm a part of a traditional sector, where I'm really not bothered about a China or a Japan coming into the scenario, because there
Yeah.
isn't a scenario. Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, when we're talking of empowering our artisans, they are already empowered. They are. There is really no comparison with Indian handcraft, Indian artisans, etc. And I think when we do our exports, our products, and not just mine, but brands like ours, the products go with tags which mentions the story. And that really catches on to the Western audience, where, because you're not buying just the product, you're also buying into the story. You're buying into the process, you're buying into the techniques, where, this handmade, the feel of the hand becomes a luxury by itself.
Yes.
And which also automatically justifies the price point. So I think at this juncture, I'm really happy that I'm in a sector where there's really no comparison. Of course, there would be, the ground realities, there would of course be many functional changes, hiccups, etc. But I think because I'm part of a traditional sector, there is really no competition. And I'm
Okay.
thankful for that. But yeah, of course, things would take time to sort of get the ball rolling. But yeah, I feel nice being in a setup like this at this juncture, really. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Dr.
don't need to be
Sanjukta, are you
bothered
there?
about China or a Japan really now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Dr.
yes,
Sanjukta, are you there?
yes, hello.
Yeah, Dr. Sanjukta, taking off from what Paramita said, And also this concerns AIW, All India Women's Federation, because uh, they are also working with a lot of NGOs. They are an NGO non-profit themselves. They are supporting a lot of rural communities. You see, and the pandemic has hurt these rural communities which are into localized production. Some of their units have stopped because obviously they are not even MSMEs or even small units. They are just, community enterprises. So how can we get microfinance, the microfinance model working to revive these units? And how can we help such clusters, a weavers clusters or a craftsman cluster, or say a honey making cluster, or these women's self-help groups and cooperatives? How can we ensure that these survive the pandemic?
This is a very interesting question, and I would like to go into some literature that's there on microfinance and how it helps households to move out of, like, small businesses to move out of poverty. So there is research by Dr. Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, among others, who actually finance company takes a small business takes a microfinance loan. It actually aids them in the process of taking off of the business. So they find that microfinance aid in the process of moving out of poverty, but it takes a little bit of time. Like, the initial few years are a little bit of struggle, and then the business sort of takes off with the help of microfinance. But they do not find the same evidence in case of very newly opened businesses. So probably in case of small rural businesses or enterprises, probably in the initial few years, a little bit of hand holding would be required, so that along with some support, so that they can sustain the period, sustain themselves through the period of less demand, and building up a foundation, so that they can eventually take off. So if microfinance sort of focuses on helping businesses take off, then I think that would be like a good.
But rural banks, banks are a little risk averse. Because they are risk averse, they will not probably be forwarding the loans to the extent that are required. I mean, is there a way to work around this problem?
Shanjukta, can I come in here, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure.
So I think one of the things is that we have found in our work that farmer producer companies are also a very important way or tool of this thing. Farmer producer companies working with cooperative banks is one solution that a lot of people, even the central government, is actually adverting on that, advertising that. So that's one way of doing this. Another thing is there's self-help groups, and there's of course JLGs, the joint liability groups, which get these loans from these MFIN companies, and they seem to be doing decently well. The problem is, of course, the COVID, where the money is not, you're not returning the money because there's no business, you're not returning the money. So there is an impact on the financial sector. If you think of the chain, I am not giving money back to the microfinance company. The microfinance is not giving it back to the NBFC. The NBFC is not giving it to the commercial bank, and therefore everything is choked up. So I think that's one challenge which the moratorium would help to solve, which the RBI did. But at the individual level, I see, especially when you're in West Bengal and many companies, what the governments are trying, state governments, central governments are trying to do is form these JLGs which can leverage. And again, e-commerce is a very interesting thing here. So recently I saw one of the IS officers in West Bengal. I follow him on Twitter, and he was advertising Bonful, which is Sundarban's honey produced in Sundarban. So he actually managed to the cooperative company to produce it, and then now they're selling it on Amazon and Flipkart. So,
Yeah,
you know,
this is where,
this,
organizations like TriFed and all are also doing that, marketing
yeah.
a lot of forest produce, tribal produce on Amazon.
So
And
what Amazon and Flipkart are actually doing,
Sonali,
sorry
would
to
you say
interrupt,
that
sorry.
e-commerce is actually the future gateway to link these communities together, and traditional communities who are into traditional produce, and keep them invested in their traditional occupations? Is e-commerce the way out?
So I want to say this, this is my perception. Again, I've not done any research on it, so don't take it.
That's okay. That's okay.
So this
I
is
mean,
my
I've seen
this thing.
research,
See, there in any form, and
recommended.
again, yeah, Rohit and Paramita can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just as a firm you're producing. Yes, you need a demand. So e-commerce is a way to scale up your and sell your produce. So that's an easy way, right? But on the back end, you need credit. So I think, and you need also, it's not like, if you traditionally see people selling, they're still selling the traditional stuff, but we all want a little bit of fusion, right? Little bit of, we want to use traditional material to wear modern clothes. Let's put it like that. So now that's where Paramita's intervention intervention becomes absolutely critical, because what I'm assuming or hoping she is doing, that she is intervening and turning these things around so that they can be more modern, right? And more bringing more modern designs, finishing, marketing, so that at a very local stuff. So even this earring that I'm wearing, it was not just happened to me. But what I'm trying to show, this is made out of jute. Again, I bought it in a West Bengal store, but I'm hoping that these things translate into a larger scale. So that's the kind of thing. So credit, design, marketing, all these three things have to go together, and skilling has to go together. And not only skilling, we have, there's a lot of research on, when we were looking up the skilling literature on skilling and entrepreneurship, we found that skilling is important, but women need to know how to manage their own finances. Women need to know they need mentorship. So one of the things your organizations like AIWC can definitely do is give financial education on financial inclusion, definitely digital inclusion. These two go hand in hand together these days. Credit, and for entrepreneurship, you need minimum of 5 years of mentorship so that they can graduate out together. Because
that is what
need advice. I think that is from the AIWC's perspective. If you were to ask me for advice, I think these are the 4 things that come out very important in the literature today.
And they can tie up with national banks, because national banks do these workshops at the community level. SBI does that. They have revolutionized the whole of Maharashtra traditional women communities, and completely around the Wardha region. So I think if AIWC can tie up with banks, seek their expertise, and mentor all these women self-help groups, at least, the local wheels keep churning. We may not have a big output, but at least the local wheels keep churning. Would you agree?
I think Shanjukta mentioned this, but I just want to emphasize Shanjukta's point again, that one of the very good things that we found, both MORT and now the World Bank have reported on it, what India did a fantastic job of leveraging its self-help groups. And they were turned, because obviously in April and May, there was a shortage of mask sanitizers. So the self-help group started producing masks and sanitizers at a very cheap rate and a rapid pace. So I think from that angle, the self-help groups have very quickly leveraged, and they had the sewing machines, they were producing thing, they could quickly go back, quickly change to producing masks. So I think, a couple of my friends who are government officers, they are very proud of the fact that they leveraged their self-help groups into producing masks, and so everything was done locally when there were clearly logistics issues. Obviously, it was much cheaper, and the local communities benefited. So I think there are positive stories also that's coming out.
Definitely.
Other stories also, but I just wanted to add that.
Okay, so now we are almost closing. So anybody has questions, please post them. But I am going to pose my last question, and that is, will we have a brand India up there in the world, where it is recognized beyond Darjeeling tea and, the handcrafted shawl or the embroidery? Can we ever have a made in India product that has a mass use and that has mass acceptability across the world? The Chinese have done it with the phones. Can we have that? Where do we stand? That this I throw open to all my guests today. And I'll begin with Rohit.
So yes, I think there is light at the end of the tunnel, and if India as an economy, as a team, together with the desired support from the government, from the banks, from the organizations, and from the economy, right where the people of India, if we all team up together, I think there is a good opportunity. We have been successful, as the examples as you had mentioned, and I think there's a lot to be done, a lot of improvements, a lot of adaptations, and a lot of strategies to be built, which can make India more popular and bring more pride to our country.
Any idea which sector can achieve this made in India brand as a universal brand? Which sector would you bet on?
So I think textile is one industry which I think
Textiles. Okay.
has a great.
Paramita is very happy. She's very happy. She has almost come out of the trap. She's looking
Yeah.
beyond COVID. Huh.
So no, textile, frankly speaking, yes, because we've seen a lot of tourists when they are coming to India, they love wearing, and they enjoy wearing Indian traditional clothes, and they post a lot of stuff, and going forward, I think textile that way has a good opportunity like that.
Okay. Paramita?
Well, global local has always been our forte, really, because of the skill sets that we have and the resources that we have. But I think what's really lacking, and what can be seen as lacking, is I think our basic sense of nationalism. That needs to be more cohesive. And if I may say so, in this in this portal, the powers that be should not be dividing the country in different parameters. They should just stop.
Absolutely.
They should just stop
Very
it.
good. You may repeat that. You may repeat that. The true nationalism is looking beyond these, as Tagore put it, narrow domestic walls. Seriously, I quote him today. But narrow domestic walls. That was very appropriate, because nationalism should be about leveraging all our regional strengths.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the diversity is what we are really talking about. It's a huge cliche now, the diversity of the country, but that's the basic fact, isn't it?
Yes.
But yeah, the powers that be shouldn't be trying to pull us all down, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Bornali, can we have a mass made in India brand which will be accepted globally? Not maybe in 10 years time, or maybe, I don't know, maybe in 5 years time. We are an ingenuous nation at the end of the day.
Yeah, obviously, we already have it. If you think of the generic drugs, pharmaceutical, they're already all over.
We already are the world's largest vaccine producer.
Yeah, so I think the problem is not that what we don't have. I can tell somebody who's lived abroad for 10 years, the Indian clothes are much loved. So textiles and clothes, shoes and textiles are our comparative advantage. You can produce this at a cheaper cost if they can, do everything as we previously discussed.
No, but to say on a more industrial scale, say cars or in technology,
we are also
anything
exporting.
you would like to bet on?
We are already doing it. So if you read that, there are Indian companies which are selling Indian intermediate inputs to other auto manufacturers. This is based on my own research. I had gone to in Chennai, and this is Friday 6:30 in the evening. That's why I'm messing up my words.
I know for sure.
So basically,
that Airtel,
sorry.
So have completely captured the telecom
Yeah, so telecom sector in Africa, Airtel has outward FDI in Africa, in Bangladesh. Actually, Airtel in Bangladesh is doing quite well. What we don't have, what we need to do is think of diversification. So what I'm just trying to say is, when I was in class 12th, and that was a long time ago, I was in college, we thought of this 5 exports: gem and jewelry, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, textiles, the 3, 4, 5 products that used to be our mainstay of products. And unfortunately, very little has changed since then. Yes, this service exports is one of our forte that we don't even talk about. But that's something, think about education and health as service sectors. A lot of medical tourism that takes place. We need to, and again, that's a big business for India. And if you especially want to improve female labor force participation, it could be a big business as, for female employers for health and medical education purposes. Again, they are the largest employers. So I think the problem is of diversification. It's not that we don't have. You already have some global brands or goods which are mass accepted. But I think we need to diversify, and that's where the challenge is, and we are not able to do that. And we have to think. I mean, my motto in life is think global, act local. So you have to think global. I mean, I just want to say is, you're a foreign investor, you have the choice of the world. But ultimately, as a human being also, or ultimately as a firm also, or this thing is, you have to sell yourself to the world. So why should
Yes, absolutely. If
why
you're
should
not
the
going
world
to
choose
sell
you? What
yourself
is
to
it
the
that you
world,
have?
then there is no way
Yeah.
you'll be competitive, or
Yeah.
no way you will
Yeah.
excel, try to excel.
Yeah. And the reason why we go and buy textiles is because it's India, it's unique, that's why we buy it. And that's why we choose it. So, what is it? Rather, we should ask ourselves is what are the products can we do to, make ourselves the Indian handloom that we love so much and treasure so much.
Dr. Sanjukta, are you there? What do you think
Yeah,
will be
hi.
big Indian brand which the world we can take note of?
I don't know about brand or industry like that, but I think India is very well noted for its welfare programs. Like you won't find as much research on like the welfare programs in India, like Narega and public distribution system, as in other parts of everybody. Like a lot of people do research on Narega and uh, public distribution system and other welfare programs. So I think India could, if with the right kind of leadership, if India could be one of the countries to first come out of poverty through its well-planned welfare programs, then that would be great. I would hope for that.
Yeah, sure. It's a very important point you make, that if welfare economics translates into a better quality of education and labor, foundational education, as Dr. Bornelli pointed out, is such an important ingredient in establishing yourself as a good human resource. If we become a good human resource, I think
Yes.
there's no end to the possibilities that potential can be exploited both domestically and internationally.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, are there any independent questions from listeners, viewers, whoever has logged in? Dr. Palit, any other question that you would like to ask?
Sorry. I already wrote it in the comment and also got the answer.
Answer. Okay. Anybody else? Do we have any more questions? Because I can't see any. Okay. So before we leave, then, what are the takeaways that we take today? It has been a very enlightening
Yes.
discussion. Yes, the psyche is low. No doubt, we are still under the fear psychosis. I just hope it doesn't become a mass hysteria. We need to hold it together and introspect a lot, because probably this is giving us an opportunity to think alternative ways of survival, and most importantly, finding our own place in the world. Probably deglobalization, this and that, but no, I strongly believe, as Dr. Bernali said, that we have to make ourselves relevant in the world, and only then can we go forward. A disease cannot box us into thoughts like deglobalize this and set up walls and barriers. The world has to be barrier free at the end of the day, and we have to be equipped to expose ourselves to standards elsewhere and increase our productivity, use our resources to the optimum, and rebuild our economy, rebuild the pyramid from bottom up. So the process has started. It may take long, but we will get there.
Yes, yes.
So thank you, dear panelists. Thank you, Dr. Bernali, Rohit, Paramita, Dr. Sanjukta, and all these lovely ladies at AIWC, Dr. Smita Palit, Mandira Chatterjee, I can't see, Madhumita Majumdar. You've put, this is a fantastic initiative you all are doing. And please keep doing this and organize these dialogues.
Yes.
So, we can share ideas and draw up a map of a new India. This is the time to do it.
Now I would like to, yes. Now I like to request our coordinator, Mrs. Madhumita Majumdar, to place the vote of thanks.
Yes.
And thank you very much,
Mrs.
Rinku
Majumdar, can you
Ghosh.
place a vote of thanks for us, please?
Thank you, Smita. Thank you, Calcutta branch, for allowing me to do this honor and also for giving me an opportunity to organize this seminar. On behalf of our organization, AIWC, I extend my sincere thanks to the esteemed panelists, Dr. Bernali Bhandari, Mr. Rohit Jalan, Ms. Paramita Banerjee, and Dr. Sanjukta Das, who spared their valuable time and from their busy schedule and shared their insights. The discussion was indeed very enriching. I am also immensely thankful to our moderator, Ms. Rinku Ghosh, for her wonderful anchoring. I must also thank the beautiful audience who have been a part of this discussion. I'm thankful to Mr. Saurabh Bonik for his constant technical support in conducting the webinar so smoothly. I also thank my childhood friend, Mr. Amit Niyogi, a very senior official of Reserve Bank of India, who helped me a lot to frame few pertinent questions for this webinar. Last but not the least, I thank my two daughters, Amrita and Shurita, for being catalyst in arranging this webinar. Thank you. Stay safe, stay home.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Love to meet you all.
Thank you.
Hope to connect later. Okay. Thanks, Rohit.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paramita. Thanks, Dr. Bernali, Dr. Sanjukta, Ms. Majumdar, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.